You know, it's pretty wild how ancient texts get pulled into very modern debates about science. And today, we're diving deep into one of the most persistent theories out there, the flat Earth. Specifically, we're tackling the claim that the Quran actually supports this idea.
So that leads us right to the big question. Does the Quran really describe a flat Earth? It's a question that sparks some really intense debate. And today, we're going to walk through one author's incredibly detailed answer to it.
So on one side, you have people who are absolutely convinced the answer is a clear yes. They point to specific verses that use words like spread out or a carpet. And for them, that's literal, open and shut proof that we live on a flat, stationary plane.
But an author named Abdullah Buffin says, hold on a second. He argues that this is a total misunderstanding of the text, and he claims the issue isn't with the book itself, but with a kind of superficial reading that completely misses the linguistic details and the all-important context.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll ask if it's really a flat Earth Quran. Then, we'll get into a really key distinction, planet Earth or just planes. From there, we'll decode some key verses, look at the idea of a cosmos in motion, and finally, talk about what it means to read beyond the surface.
So let's start with the author's foundational argument. Because honestly, if you get this one idea, everything else just clicks into place. It's all about the difference between the entire planet and the ground right underneath our feet.
This verse right here is pretty central to the whole debate. Now, flat Earth proponents look at that phrase, how it is spread out, and they say, see, proof. But the author we're following says, not so fast. You have to look at the whole picture.
Okay, let's break down the logic here because it's pretty clever. The first verse talks about mountains saying they're erected, towering and vertical. Then, separately, it talks about the Earth and says it's spread out. The author's big question is this: why would the text mention them as two different things if the Earth was supposed to include the mountains? His conclusion? The Earth in this specific line must mean just the plains, the flat ground, not the entire planet.
And this is where it really comes together. According to the author, it just wouldn't make sense to describe a whole globe, a sphere covered in massive, jagged mountain ranges with words like bed or carpet. Those words, he says, are a perfect fit for the vast, flat plains on the planet, but they're a terrible fit for the planet itself.
All right, so with that foundational idea in our back pocket, plains versus planet, we can now start to decode the key verses that are always at the center of this debate. This is where we really get into the linguistic nitty-gritty.
First one up is from Surah An-Nazi'at. The key word here is dahaha. This word is a real cornerstone for the flat Earth argument, but the author is about to argue that its common interpretation is just plain wrong.
So you can see the two interpretations right here. The flat Earth reading says daha means to flatten something, to spread it out. But the author's linguistic analysis of classical Arabic says, no, the root word daha actually means to push or to throw something with great force. We're talking about a completely different, much more dynamic kind of action. Okay, next we have another one of these contested phrases. This one's from Surah Qaf, madadnaha, which is often translated as stretched it out. And again, you can see why on the surface that sounds a lot like flattening.
But again, the author offers a totally different picture. Instead of a simple two-dimensional stretch, like pulling a piece of taffy, he argues madanaha means something more like expansion, like blowing up a balloon. And it's this expansion, he says, that created the deep cracks and fissures in the Earth's crust, which is where the mountains were then set, almost like giant pegs.
So that brings us to the whole purpose of mountains. This verse says they were placed on earth lest it shake with them. The key word is tamida, which means to shake. But the real question is, what kind of shaking are we talking about here?
So the flat Earth view interprets tamida to mean mountains are like giant cosmic brakes, stopping the planet from moving through space. The author counters this completely, arguing tamida refers to seismic shaking, tremors and earthquakes. So in his view, mountains aren't stopping the planet's orbit. They're acting like geological stabilizers.
And that distinction is actually huge because it lets us move past just arguing about single words and start to see the bigger cosmological picture the author says the text is painting, a picture of a dynamic, moving universe, not a static one.
Let's look at another one of those key words, qarar. It's often translated as fixed, and for flat Earth proponents, that means fixed in place, totally unmoving. The author, however, argues that in Arabic, qarar is more about being a place of stability and settlement, a good, stable habitat for life to exist, not a planet that's literally motionless in space.
And now we get to what the author presents as maybe his most powerful piece of evidence for a moving earth. In this verse, both the heaven and the earth are given a direct command to do something.
Let's break this down for a second. The command is to come. So how can something that is supposedly fixed and completely stationary come anywhere? The author argues that this command itself implies that the Earth was created with a built-in capacity for motion. A static planet literally couldn't obey. And then he links this ability to move all the way back to that first word we looked at, dahaha, that forceful push that set the Earth into motion in the first place.
So after digging into all these linguistic details and looking at the bigger cosmic picture, we can finally get to the author's final conclusion, the thing that ties all of these threads together.
Ultimately, the author's thesis is pretty simple. The Quran does not describe a flat Earth. The error, he says, isn't in the scripture itself. It's in an interpretation that's just too literal, one that fails to look any deeper into the language and the context. So to sum it all up, this analysis says the flat Earth reading makes two big mistakes. First, it misunderstands key Arabic words by just taking the most obvious, surface-level meaning. And second, it messes up by applying descriptions that are meant for the flat plains on the Earth to the entire planet as a whole.
And that kind of leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? This whole analysis really hinges on this idea of a deep reading versus a surface reading. It suggests that maybe any text, ancient or modern, has layers of meaning that you can only find if you look past the obvious. So it makes you wonder, no matter what the topic is, what truths are we all missing when we only read the surface?